You can see the marks still, I've seen it. They're in the concrete. So that one lines up with, I believe, the Records building. So that would be an 8th shot. We have photos of people bending down to look at where the grass had been. There was a groove in the grass. And I think Buddy Walters saw an FBI man reach down into the grass, pick up the bullet, and slip it into his pocket. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess, Connell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. We are in our walkthrough of the JFK assassination through a variety of literature. That means that every episode we are looking at a different book. We have looked at old first generation early researchers into the case, and we will have more of those coming. We have also had more new books. And by doing so, I'm hoping that we begin to see the patterns that emerge. We get to see the options that there are and the variety of research that exists into the case, as well as like the credibility and voice of different researchers. So today we are actually going to be looking at part of a book by a man who has now become a friend. If you've been around on the channel, you have seen that I have released an interview with Robert, and we have spent time. He is generously and graciously familiarizing me with lots of the local topics because we both happen to live here in the Dallas area. And so actually through the gift of this book, thank you, Mary Helen, we got connected. We went to coffee with I went to coffee with he and his wife, and we got to meet. And then since then, we've had many opportunities to visit and connect. And I love this book so much. You will love it too. There will be information in the show notes. If you do not have this book, this is a book that is just excellent. It is called JFK Absolute Proof by Robert Groden, and it has over 1,000 photos. It also has an introduction by his colleague and friend, Josiah Thompson, and it talks about, is Oswald a CIA agent? It talks about JFK's missing brain, previously unreleased photographs of Lee Oswald undergoing surgery, his final moments, as well as autopsy photos and much more. Robert Groden has the largest collection of JFK assassination related photos and videography, and has released over 2,200 photographs and tons of videos. I mean, I also have this. There are many different DVD collections that he has. So the link is in the show notes. He is happy to sign any of his books that you purchase from him. If you don't know, Robert Groden, this is what he looked like before. He is the one who took the Zapruder film to the Geraldo show in 1975. He had access because he worked for a photo company that had the contract with Life magazine, and he made a clear copy. He basically did an early stabilization technique that he created in order to hone in on the president's head so you could see a clear picture of the movement of what was happening to the president. That's how he came into the public eye. And he is one of those longtime researchers that is still active in the case. He is still doing research. He and Janet are researching and preparing a book about the J.D. Tippit case. So there is more to come. But today we are going to look at two sections in this book. What we are going to do is be looking at bullets and wounds, and specifically how many shots were taken. So that's what we're trying to see. And here is an example. The very first picture of this chapter says the trajectories of the 3 bullets which actually caused the entry wounds attributed to the single bullet theory. So one of the things that needs to be discussed is the trajectory of the bullet that hit Connally. We'll just start there. A bullet that hits you, this is the photo that's the last known photo of the positions of the people in the vehicle before any shots were fired. So you can see Kennedy is still smiling. Jackie is just looking. Connally is looking to the side. And here is where his bullet wound would have hit. It went down and hit through his nipple, below his nipple. And so the trajectory is a very sharp one. We talked in the last episode about the entrance wound in President Kennedy. It was below his Adam's apple, but on the midline was how the physician described it. And so we have those trajectories, and we have the back wound, which is one that we'll discuss today. So he starts out in chapter 5, too many shots, too little time, disproving the single bullet theory. The actual physical evidence includes the firing capability of the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, which is the rifle that allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald used from the alleged sniper's window. The Zapruder film was an extremely accurate clock for the murder. Of course, this is how Robert entered the case, was his work with the Zapruder film. But as he began to do the research, and he knew it inside and out because he had worked with the film for so many years, but he knew that there were, I believe it's 18.3 frames per second. And so because of that, because we know the filming time frame of that camera, then we can take that and we can build out an accurate clock of exactly how long you have between the shots. The photographic evidence and the films of the assassination were among the most important evidence. Add to this an abundance of concrete medical evidence, and one is left with a massive library of indisputable evidence proving that the assassination could not have been the work of any one man. The film of the assassination taken by Zapruder, reviewed in tandem with an audio recording taken from a Dallas police dictabelt of the shots. I'll point out this is something that I think came out during the HSCA, and Robert was also involved in that investigation because he was working for the HSCA as, I believe, a photographic consultant at that point. So he was serving the committee members with his expertise and was also one of the people that was working on accurately getting the information from that dictabelt when that happened. So the Zapruder film and the dictabelt show that at one point, 2 different shots were fired exactly 1.7 seconds apart. So there's 2 shots that at one point are fired, and they're exactly 1.7 seconds apart. At another point, 2 additional shots occur 0.7 seconds apart. The Mannlicher Carcano rifle, allegedly used by Oswald in the shooting, cannot fire 2 shots in less than 2.3 seconds, even if the shooter doesn't take time to aim. So we're going to be getting into bullets and guns and trajectories, and something you need to know is I'm definitely no expert. I'm going off of the very little bit of hands-on experience I've had, and then the expertise of those who have researched it. So in all of this, bring your evidence, add your links to the comments. It's always welcome. But I will say that as I held Robert's Mannlicher Carcano, and he showed the function of you have the gun, it's a bolt action, so you have to eject the bullet that's been shot, add a new one manually, we assume, because there was no clip found. So a manual insertion of the bullet and then back to reverse so that the bullet is then loaded and then fire. And again, 2.3 seconds is the smallest amount of time that can happen, even if the shooter doesn't take time to aim. This impossibility, which the Warren Commission recognized, led the Warren Commission to adopt what has become known as the preposterous single bullet theory, which simply states that a single bullet struck President Kennedy, passed through him, and then struck Governor Connally 1.7 seconds later. So I just noticed something that fell out of my book. I'm going to replace it, but I just wanted to let you know, if you are not familiar with this book, one of the other things you get when you purchase the book directly from Robert is a copy of the Texas theater ticket, which Oswald did have in his pocket. The man who was in the upper balcony did not, but because there were 2 Oswalds arrested at the Texas theater, but the one that was on the ground floor had this in his pocket, and it is a Texas theater ticket from 1963. You can see that Robert includes as a little memento in every single copy that he ships out. So I'm going to put that back in its spot. According to the magic bullet theory, a single shot caused 7 separate wounds in the 2 men. Let's count them. 1, 2. In this theory, this is an exit wound. So that would be 2. 3 would be inside of Governor Connally's upper, right next to his underarm. 4 would be out of under the right nipple. 5 would be through the wrist, and out the wrist would be 6. And then 7 would be in his left thigh. That's where the bullet lodged. It's where they pulled out reportedly 5 different fragments from the wrist, and there was a fragment left in the thigh at the end of surgery. So 7 wounds in 2 men, including a wound in the president's throat, which was described as an entrance wound according to the Dallas doctors at Parkland Hospital. That's what we read last time. This entrance wound was transformed via verbal plastic surgery into a convenient exit wound to accommodate the single bullet theory. The fact that the wound trajectories and angles, that's what is being pointed out here, that this bullet entered the president at a certain angle and this bullet entered Connally at a different angle. So the fact, and then if you picture this one, if you say, okay, well, this is the wound, and then it goes out here, there's no way you get a bullet that can come down to here. So the fact that the wound trajectories and angles never did line up did not deter the commission and its defenders from relying on this fiction to explain their myth of a lone assassin. The physical impossibility of the single bullet theory is at the center of a controversy that has raged for nearly 5 decades. Could one man have fired all of the shots required within the allowable time span? If not, a conspiracy was responsible for the killing of the president. Now, we need to deal with this word conspiracy. Conspiracy does not necessarily, I think it connotes like, oh, all these conspirators off in a room somewhere, and they're dark and they're plotting and they're doing this with their hands as they talk, and they're smoking and really coming up with a conspiracy. What it can mean is this person and this person connect and make a plan, and there are more than one conversation happening about this thing involving more than one person. That is conspiring to kill. That's all that's required. Not 17 evil men all sitting in a room agreeing and making a plan that they all know the full ramifications of. That's not what is needful for there to be a conspiracy. But there are more than one shooter, and therefore there is some sort of conspiracy happening. There are 2 basic schools of thought about the total time of the shooting. The Zapruder film is a stopwatch for the event. A live oak tree blocked the view from the depository window until Zapruder frame 210. We talked about this a little bit in the episode where we talked with Miss Pat in the boarding house, but there was a view of the road from that 6th floor window that was partially blocked by a tree at a certain point. Here is a photo that shows that right here. And so there's only a certain point at which shooting could even have started from that window. Before that, it was not visible. So he's saying until frame 210, it's not even an option to shoot from that window. The fatal headshot strikes the president at frame 313. 103 frames or 5 seconds later. The FBI and the Warren Commission both agreed on this. So it's not possible before 210. 5 seconds later is when the fatal headshot happens. So you only have a certain amount of time. It's called 6 seconds, 5.6 seconds in order to get off every single thing done. The evidence of more than 3 shots being fired in Dealey Plaza is overwhelming. He says, the second school of thought agrees with my discovery in 1977, which I presented to the photographic panel of the HSCA. This timeline demonstrates that, in fact, 2 shots were fired before frame 210. That means 2 shots were gotten off while the live oak tree made it impossible for those shots to have come from the 6th floor Depository. It says the first came around Zapruder frame 155 and the second around 189. This increases the total shooting time to somewhere around 158 frames or 8.6 seconds. So 2 shots were fired before it was possible for one to have come from the depository window. And also they happened that expands the total amount of shooting time to 8.6 seconds. It's impossible for both to be correct. The Warren Report defenders would love to be able to accept the possibility of additional shooting time because that would make it more possible for the Mannlicher Carcano to have gotten off the shots that were more, it would allow for more like aiming time and things like that. But the problem is the live oak tree. In order to state that there were 8 or more seconds for the shooting, you have to admit that there were at least 2 shooters firing from different directions. Whenever the other side produces a television program dealing with the assassination, they inevitably misrepresent the issue of the firing capability of the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, allegedly found on the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Now, I just want to go through that really fast. We may have additional episodes coming up where we deal with the rifles, but the Mannlicher Carcano was not identified as such, I believe, until the next day. The rifle somehow transforms from a German Mauser with a very particular ammo type to a Mannlicher Carcano. And all the first views and all the first mentions talk about the Mauser. And then later it becomes this Mannlicher Carcano. So that's why Robert says the Mannlicher Carcano allegedly found on the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. It's important to note and to remember when we're dealing with these things. It might seem like, oh, you're making a big deal out of it, but we need to be very particular in our language and careful about which evidence we give credence to. He's still talking about pro-Warren Commission television programs. He says they demonstrate how an expert sharpshooter might be able to get off 3 shots in 8 seconds. And in 1 time out of 100, the shooter might actually hit something. This, we are told, is proof that Lee Oswald might have been the lone assassin. This is perhaps the most dishonest argument of all. These government propagandists have become known as lone nutters since they back the theory that a single lone nut assassinated the president. Several recent television mockumentaries have adopted my 8-second timeline to back the lone assassin theory, but refuse to mention that when taking in the account of the existence of the tree, this time frame proves more than one shooter. So he's saying, if you believe the 8-second timeline, then you can't have Oswald firing all of them because of the live oak. I proved this thesis via the Zapruder film and a new Zapruder film jiggle analysis, where some Zapruder film frames blur as Zapruder flinches, responding to hearing gunshots. This is one of the other pieces of evidence that I sometimes hear in the comments where people say, well, Zapruder said that he didn't hear any shots, and since his film doesn't show any response to the shots, it's unlikely that any came from so close to him. Well, neither statement is true. When you look at Zapruder's first comment about the shooting, and I believe for the first 36 hours or something, he talks about that he thought there was a shooter right there by him, that he thought they were coming from off to his right. And then the other thing that's the tell is that there are moments in the Zapruder film where his body is involuntarily reacting to the shots, and so you can see the jiggles. That's what Robert is talking about. Because of the time required to fire and refire the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, at most only the 2nd and the 5th of the confirmed shots, if any at all, could have come from a Mannlicher Carcano rifle in the 6th floor window. So now he's going to account for where the different shots came from. He says the first shot probably came from a spot on the knoll. So not necessarily the same spot as the headshot, but he's saying it probably came from a spot on the knoll. The third shot originated from either the Daltex building or the Dallas County Records building. So we have the first shot coming from the knoll, that would be this shot. The second coming from potentially the 6th floor. The third shot coming from Daltex or the Dallas County Records building. He says, of the 7 shots originally identified on the audio recording, the 2nd and the 5th came from the so-called sniper's nest. The 1st and the 4th came from the stockade fence. So that would put the 4th as the stockade fence. The 3rd, which struck Texas Governor John Connally, probably came from the western end of the 6th floor, a trajectory that remained untested by the HSCA. So if you picture the alleged sniper's window all the way to the right of that building, well, all the way to the left of that building is where potentially that sharp shot that we talked about on Connally could have come from. Some people think it could have come from the roof of that building. But the angle isn't right to have come from that far southeastern window where allegedly Lee Oswald had been shooting. The 6th and 7th shots both came from behind, probably from either one or both of the Dell Tex building or the Dallas County Records building. One of these shots struck a curb near bystander James Tague, who was standing by the triple railroad underpass at the western end of Dealey Plaza, where Commerce and Main Streets meet. In any case, the true issue is not the ability to get off 3 shots in just under 6 seconds. The real question is, can you get off the first 2 shots in 1.6 seconds? Both the Zapruder film and the Dictabelt audio recording of the shots accidentally made by the Dallas Police Department. Remember, one of the following motorcycle cops in the motorcade accidentally, it's believed it's accidental, jammed his radio. And so for the duration of the shooting, there was no active chatter on that particular channel and it was jammed. Well, what happened was his radio basically created a recording of the assassination. And so later, during the HSCA, they went back and listened through that Dictabelt audio and were able to remove the street noise and the backfiring of the motorcycles and whatever else was going on and isolate potential audio of shots. We've talked about this in previous episodes. And so when you have a matchup between what's happening visually with the Zapruder film and what's happening in an audio recording from that Dictabelt, that's where you get towards the truth. That's where you get towards coalesced evidence backing one another up. But what you can't have is things that are happening 1.6 seconds apart in both Zapruder and the audio, but then give yourself the leisure of making everything go the nice 2.3 seconds apart like the Mannlicher Carcano requires. If you have 2 shots at 1.6 seconds apart, you can't have them both coming from the same Mannlicher Carcano. It can't happen. The Mannlicher Carcano minimum time is 2.3 seconds. That's without even taking time to aim. He emphasizes nobody has ever done it faster than 2.3 seconds, and most cannot even do it that rapidly. In 1966, on a CBS News special examining the Warren Report, Walter Cronkite asked rhetorically if Lee Oswald could have fired the rifle fast enough to have acted alone and accomplished the murder by himself. Cronkite's answer to himself was this: under normal circumstances, probably not. But these were not normal circumstances. He was shooting at the president. Well, what difference does that make, Robert asks. I mean, if anything, that would heighten your anxiety. It wouldn't make you a faster, more accurate shot. I don't care how much the adrenaline and, all of that testosterone perhaps flowing through his veins, it doesn't suddenly turn you into a crack shot. It doesn't suddenly make you able to do what excellent marksmen, excellent riflemen aren't able to do. It doesn't make you superhuman all of a sudden. He says, one last time, the rifle cannot fire 2 shots in 1.6 seconds. So we're going to talk through different bullet entry locations, where there's evidence for it. One of the things that we talked about in that conversation with Pat Hall that now we're getting a look at is in frames 142, 143, and 144. What you see is behind the presidential vehicle, it says the first fired bullet shot from the grassy knoll misses and hits the street directly in front of bystander and witness Phil Willis at frame 143. And you can see there's a white mark in the film. The president turns to look towards the source of the shot, the grassy knoll. Several witnesses, such as Gene Newman, saw this bullet hit the street at this point. So there's no white mark, and there's a white mark, and it shows it here in greater detail. This is what Gene Newman was talking about, what she told him about, and he went back to his film and looked carefully and found, okay, this is one of the shots, and he is alleging it's the first fired bullet, that it missed. He points out in one of his DVDs that at this point you can actually see President Kennedy. He's waving, and apparently he starts to lower his hand and his head turns toward the direction where the shot would have come from. Then we have film frame 188. He says in this spot that this is the moment a bullet strikes the president at the bottom of his Adam's apple. He says it's happening right here. And he says because you can tell by 5 frames later, which would be less than a second later, the president's, in fact, that would be like a quarter second later or something, or a third of a second later. The president's upper torso and head are thrown violently rearward. So you can see a backwards movement there, but not his right arm and hand. So his upper torso is doing something independently from his arm. And so that's indicating where the first shot hit. Okay, so the entrance wound would have looked like before the tracheotomy, right above here. The autopsy face sheet showed the location of the back wound, several inches below the entrance wound. So we have an entrance wound here and a back wound further back down on the back. George Berkeley, the White House medical officer, said Kennedy died of a bullet wound in the right temple. The Chicago Daily News printed that the day of the assassination. Dr. Berkeley stated that the fatal bullet entered the president's right temple. This is consistent with the autopsy photographs of the president's head published elsewhere in this book. The autopsist, James Humes, at the time of his November 23rd phone conversation with Dr. Malcolm Perry, he called Malcolm Perry, who had done the tracheotomy, and he asks about that and realizes it was not an exit wound, but that it had been an entry wound. He notes 3 to 5 millimeters, and that then the tracheotomy was done. So that was an entrance wound. Also, there is a note from the FBI. There's a receipt for the missile, which is a bullet, removed from JFK at the autopsy. So at the time of the autopsy, there is a bullet that has been removed. And then there's a doctor's report from Dr. Perry, the quote that says there was an entrance wound below his Adam's apple. We read through that yesterday. So then we have Zapruder frame 154. President Kennedy is looking to his left as he hears the first shot from the grassy knoll. At the moment of this shot, there is a splice in the Zapruder film. So we have 154, and then here he's edited it to kind of show like this is the direction he was looking. And then by 157, it says at the time of the first Zapruder film splice, President Kennedy immediately turns toward the grassy knoll and stops waving. So there's a splice that was done. That's right through the presidential limousine. Zapruder frame 161. So this is just 7 frames later, which would be less than half a second. Now we see the president's, you can see the shape of where his head is turned, and then you can see the shape of where his head is turned in this one. So Robert has just edited it to kind of show the direction of the face to make it more clear. Then, interestingly, so this one's a fun shot. I would never have thought to do this, I don't think, but the reflection of the book depository is seen on the trunk of the Secret Service car. You can see in the yellow circle, and he has blown it up here for us. When you reverse and correct the image, it shows the fact that the Texas live oak tree would have blocked the first 3 shots. So here, from the reflection of the shiny car, he's giving another angle where you can see the live oak was still covering that window. Well, then here, one of the 10 frames that had been removed from the original film within days of the assassination is the first frame where a shot of the so-called Oswald window could have hit President Kennedy. So all that action had already happened before you even get to this frame where he's going behind the sign. He notes, and this is important, he was the one who started the X. So when you go to Dealey Plaza, one of the things you see is that now there are 2 X's, but he started the one that was at this point of the fatal headshot. He put an X there in 1995, and he has kept it up. He said he's done it more than a dozen times, that he just goes out and repaints. They've repaved. They've done different things to try to erase it or refinish it, and he just keeps going out and putting the X on the place. So he says thousands of people come to Dallas every month to see Dealey Plaza. They are compelled to see for themselves the impossibility of the Warren Commission fiction. There are 2 damaged frames of the second Zapruder film Splice at frames 207 to 212. There were 4 frames that were removed. This was the point where the president could first be seen from the book depository. None of the shots before this point could have come from the so-called Oswald window. So then we have things like, these are the sorts of things that are going to be why you want to get this book, because we don't even have time to do it justice, but he takes shots that are just a few apart from one another and shows differences, like the direction of the head, why it moves forward, why it moves back, how far the movement is, things that you might miss if you're just observing the film in real time. He slows it down and talks. The other thing is the actual location of the entrance wound, as mentioned by Admiral George Berkeley, the president's personal physician. So you can see there are not just 1 bullet wound in the back, but there are 2, and that the entry wound that went in the throat would have come out here, and this is a different entry wound. The entry wound shows a different, it's almost like a volcano, where you can picture like it mounding up around a hole. That's what this entrance wound looks like, because there's the puncture of the bullet, but then the skin around it is responding to that impression. And that particular wound, I believe the physician said they put their finger inside of it, and it only went in a depth of 1 to 2 inches. And there is that receipt of a missile, a bullet missile from the FBI. So there are different drawings that place the evidence at different places, but the photos give us the evidence that we need. He again is looking. He shows Governor Connally doing precisely what Governor Connally said he did. That Governor Connally turns around to look. The president has already clearly been shot and has reacted to that 1.7 full seconds before Connally then responds. And one thing he points out in this book that's important to note is that Connally, 2 full seconds after being hit by a bullet near his right armpit, his wrist is still undamaged and he's holding his hat. And so that shows that the wrist wound was the result of a second separate bullet. So he is alleging not only that Kennedy was shot by a different bullet sequence than is alleged in the Warren report, but also that Governor Connally was shot in a different order and different time frame from the president. The x-ray of Governor's right wrist is here. The photo that shows Connally still holding his Stetson-style cowboy hat would have been impossible. This is fully 5 seconds after he had been struck in the back. He is still holding that in his right hand. It would have been impossible if his wrist had already been exploded and blown out by that bullet. So he's saying probably this is the trajectory. So he shows that. I want to remind you that what was put in as the evidence for the president's shot trajectory was not the actual bullet wounds, but was this crude drawing. The drawing was done by someone who was not given access to the president's body, was not drawing from notes. It was someone drawing from the recollection of the person who was there. So just really odd, really not a proper way to go about it at all. It was just an artist's rendering of what he had been told. We also know for sure the locations. I'll just show you. This is another, like, you want this book. I'm telling you, if you're interested in this case at all, you want this book. But we have the photos of Governor Connally's clothing, so you can see the actual places and think for yourself. If a bullet went in here, right near the underarm, look where it's coming out here, and look where it's going here on the left thigh, and then note where the wrist was. But then we get into other shots. So this is where I've really gotten interested, because if we say there are 3 to 5 shots that hit the 2 men. So I just want to remind you, 3 to 5 shots that hit the 2 men, plus we know James Tague, right? So that would make 4 to 6 just for those 3 people. But then we have the one that hit, remember up that he showed in the video. So that would make 7. Other known shots. There was one that was found in the grass down here. You can see the marks still. I've seen it. They're in the concrete. So that one lines up with, I believe, the records building. So that would be an 8th shot. We have photos of people bending down to look at where the grass had been. There was a groove in the grass. And I think Buddy Walters, I believe, is the policeman or sheriff that saw an FBI man reach down into the grass, pick up the bullet, and slip it into his pocket. So that would be 8. We have a missed shot over here in the concrete, which Robert used to point to until finally the Dallas city got sick of it and they came and patched it up with concrete. But that would be a 9th shot. There's a point where he says there was no damage to the chrome windshield frame of the limousine at the beginning, but by the end, the bullet had struck the chrome. There's a spot there. So you can see the different data points. Is it 9? Is it 10? Is it 11? And with a book like this, you can do your own thinking. This is another place in the book, Mystery, How Many Additional Bullets? Here he points us to a memo. This memo, written by FBI Assistant Director Alan Belmont and sent to FBI Deputy Director Clyde Tolson from the very day of the assassination, I have not actually read this, states, quote, "The Secret Service had one of the bullets that struck President Kennedy, and the other is lodged behind the president's ear, and we are arranging to get both of these. Another bullet lodged behind the president's ear. What happened to that bullet? Where did it come from? How did Belmont know about it? When was it removed? What happened to it? Might this bullet be the one or yet another one removed from the president by Dr. Humes at the autopsy?" Very interesting. So then he shows where the additional shots struck. That's what we talked about. So we have the however many you put for Kennedy and Connally, let's say 3 to 6 that actually hit them, plus the one that hit James Tague. There was damage to the curb for that one. Then the windshield, then the concrete down here, then a different concrete. So what is that up to? 7, 8, 9, 10, potentially 11 from the chrome, and 12. You've got quite a lot of shots going on. So that is the selection that we came to read today. I mean, there is so much more. I'm sitting here. The very next page is called How Gerald Ford Sold Out the Country in the Memory of the President, the Single Bullet Theory, Part 5. So, I want to read it all with you, honestly. But what we all really need to do is you need to get this book. If you are remotely interested, I want you to have this book. There is a link in the show notes. But let me know what you make of this. I know that especially if you entered this series, or maybe even entered this video, believing the Warren report was accurate and true and a good faith effort by our government, then it's a lot to swallow that there were 11. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you actually are thinking and what you make of all of these shots, because that's a lot of shots coming from a lot of different angles. So let's talk about it in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Come back next time. We are going to be going through a writing by Walsh and Lifton, the same man who did Best Evidence, about what they call the super bullet and the wounding of Governor Connally. So we're going to be looking in specifically at the wounds on Connally. So on the heels of this conversation, that's where we're headed next. I hope you'll come back for that. Again, this one was published in 2013. Robert Groden is still researching. Come back for that next time. Let me hear from you in the comments. I'm so looking forward to that. And I'm really enjoying this look at deeper things. Like, I learned something this time. I didn't even know about that FBI memo about the bullet lodged in the president's brain. Very interesting. So we're learning stuff all the time. I hope you are too. We'll see you next time. Bye.